Please send someone, please. I want to kill my family.
Someone killed your family?
Somebody killed my came home, my family's dead. My wife, my son, my granddaughter's dead.
Hold on. It's an apartment or a residence?
This is a resident.
Resident. What's your name?
My name is Robert Short. Robert Short. I checked that for they've been beaten.
It was just another Monday morning in Columbus, Georgia. January 4th, 2016. Nobody expected anything unusual that day. But this single phone call would reveal something nobody saw coming: a family torn apart from the inside. 3 people dead. A grandmother, her teenage son, and a little 10-year-old girl. And the killer? He wasn't some stranger who broke in. He was family. Someone they trusted. Someone they loved. Someone who sat at their dinner table and shared their holidays. That's what makes the story so terrifying. It shows how the people closest to us can sometimes be the most dangerous. Dawn had barely broken over the quiet neighborhoods of Columbus, Georgia, on that frigid January morning in 2016. The air hung heavy with an unseasonal chill that seemed to whisper of the horror about to unfold. For Robert Short, it began as just another ordinary Monday, following the familiar rhythm of his daily routine. But fate had scripted a different story for him that day, one that would forever alter the fabric of his life and send shockwaves through the peaceful community of Upatoy. As Robert's car turned onto his street, the first hints that something was terribly wrong began to surface. His eyes caught the garage door standing open, an unusual sight that made his heart skip a beat. The space where his wife's silver 2014 Volkswagen Beetle should have been gaped empty, and his green GMC, which typically sat in the driveway, was nowhere to be seen. A cascade of small details began to paint a picture of wrongness. The attic door hanging askew, his wife's hat discarded on the concrete, and most disturbing of all, the telltale darkness of dried blood near the entrance. His hands trembling, Robert approached the kitchen door leading from the garage. It stood slightly ajar, another deviation from the normal order of his household. As he pushed it open, the silence that greeted him was deafening. No welcoming call from Gloria, his wife of nearly 20 years. No sound of his teenage son Caleb's video games, or the cheerful giggling of his granddaughter Gianna, whom everyone lovingly called Gigi. "Gloria," he called out, his voice echoing through the unnaturally still house. The response was silence, broken only by the sound of his own rapidly beating heart. The horror unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. In the hallway, he found Gloria lying face down, motionless. His mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. As he reached down with trembling fingers to check for a pulse, he somehow knew he wouldn't find. The chill of her skin confirmed his worst fears. Panic rising in his throat, Robert stumbled through the house, calling out for his son and granddaughter. In the living room, the sight of 10-year-old Gigi's small form, laid out like a broken doll, brought him to his knees. The innocent child who had brought so much joy to their lives lay still, her presence reduced to an unthinkable tableau of violence. Desperate hope drove him forward, searching for his 17-year-old son Caleb. The search led him to the master bedroom's walk-in closet, where he found the final piece of this grotesque puzzle, Caleb's bound form, showing no signs of life. With hands shaking so violently he could barely operate his phone, Robert dialed 911. His voice, when it finally came, emerged as a broken whisper. "Someone please, I came home. My family dead. Son. My dead." The dispatcher's calm voice seemed to come from a different universe, one where such horrors didn't exist. As police sirens began to wail in the distance, Robert Short stood in his once peaceful home, now transformed into a crime scene, his world shattered beyond recognition. Corporal John Papey had seen his share of violence during his military service, but nothing had prepared him for the scene that awaited him in the quiet Upatoy neighborhood that morning. As he pulled his cruiser to a stop on the street, the winter sun cast long shadows across the driveway where Robert Short stood, a shell-shocked figure barely able to form coherent sentences. The garage door gaped open like a wound in the house's facade, revealing scattered evidence of the violence that had occurred within. Arrows from the attic lay scattered across the concrete floor, and the hanging attic door swung slightly in the morning breeze. The illuminated attic light cast an eerie glow over the scene, highlighting dark stains that the experienced officer immediately recognized as dried blood. With practiced precision, Papey and his fellow officers coordinated their movements through the house. Each step revealed new horrors that even seasoned law enforcement officers found difficult to process. The first victim, Gloria Short, lay in a pool of blood at the end of the hallway, her body bound with a grotesque combination of blue painter's tape and duct tape. The careful, methodical nature of the bindings spoke of premeditation rather than chaos. In the living room, the scene became even more heartbreaking. 10-year-old Gianna's small form lay face up, her injuries particularly brutal for one so young. Beside her, a 20-pound dumbbell bore silent witness to the violence, its surface stained with blood. Lieutenant Mike Myand, surveying the scene, felt his professional detachment waver at the sight of such senseless brutality inflicted on a child. The final victim, 17-year-old Caleb, was discovered in the master bedroom's walk-in closet. The grass clinging to his socks told its own story. He had spent time outside, likely during the initial confrontation. This detail would later prove crucial to understanding the sequence of events. Detective Alan Malone, taking in the size of the residence, knew they faced a massive task in processing the scene. Every room held potential evidence. Every surface might contain the key to understanding what had transpired in this once peaceful home. The investigators' trained eyes noted subtle details. The carefully placed tape, the strategic positioning of the bodies, the calculated violence that suggested this was no random act of brutality. In the backyard, pieces of duct tape created a trail of breadcrumbs, leading investigators to begin piecing together the terrible story of that night. The scene painted a picture of a carefully planned attack that had gone terribly, brutally wrong, leaving 3 innocent lives extinguished and a community forever changed. The investigation began to unfold like a complex puzzle, each piece revealing new depths to the tragedy. Detective Alan Malone's first breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a GPS tracker silently broadcasting from one of the stolen vehicles. As investigators converged on Oakland Park, they found both missing vehicles abandoned like discarded evidence of the killer's escape. In the crime lab, technicians worked with methodical precision. Under the eerie blue glow of luminol, the vehicles began to tell their stories. The steering wheel, armrest, and gearshift illuminated with the telltale signs of blood, each glowing spot a silent witness to the violence that had occurred. DNA swabs were carefully collected from every surface the perpetrators might have touched, building a scientific narrative of the crime. Meanwhile, the community mourned. The funeral drew over 1,200 people, Gloria's former co-workers, Caleb's high school classmates, and Gigi's Girl Scout troop all gathered to say goodbye. The 3 coffins stood as stark reminders of lives brutally cut short. The case took an unexpected turn when a mother's conscience became too heavy to bear. Her phone call to the police station would prove to be the thread that would begin to unravel the entire case. Her son, she revealed, had been involved in the theft of the vehicles. But as investigators would soon discover, this was merely the tip of a much darker iceberg. Detective Malone's attention turned to Caleb's phone records, which revealed frequent communications with a family member named Javer Tapley. What at first appeared to be innocent cousin-to-cousin contact would soon expose a sinister plot born of jealousy and hatred. The digital breadcrumbs left behind in deleted messages and social media communications began painting a disturbing picture of premeditation and betrayal. Each interview brought new revelations. Raheem Gibson, brought in for questioning, began to crack under the weight of his conscience. His story of being merely a lookout would eventually unravel, revealing a more active role in the night's events. The investigation's focus sharpened on 3 suspects: Javer Tapley, the cousin who should have been family but became the architect of destruction; Raheem Gibson, whose role would prove more significant than initially claimed; and 15-year-old Rufus Burks, whose young age belied the gravity of his involvement. The truth, when it finally emerged, proved more chilling than anyone could have imagined. At the center of this tragedy stood Javer Tapley, a young man whose familiar presence in the Short household made his betrayal all the more devastating. He had shared family vacations with them, broken bread at their table, and even slept in their home. Yet beneath this facade of family ties lurked a darkness born of jealousy and resentment. In the interrogation room, Javer maintained a carefully constructed mask of innocence. "I would never have something to do with my own cousin," he insisted, his voice steady but his eyes avoiding direct contact. "I'm not that type of person," but the evidence told a different story. His deleted text messages to Caleb revealed careful planning, each message a step closer to the eventual tragedy. 19-year-old Raheem Gibson's involvement began to unravel during his interview. Unlike Javer's cool demeanor, Raheem's conscience weighed heavily on him. "I started shaking," he admitted, describing the moments after they arrived at the Short residence. His initial claim of being merely a lookout expanded into a fuller confession as the weight of his guilt became too heavy to bear. The third perpetrator, 15-year-old Rufus Burks, presented a particularly tragic figure. His youth stood in stark contrast to the gravity of his actions. Identified by a witness near the crime scene, Rufus remained silent during questioning, but his digital footprint spoke volumes. Messages between him and Javer painted a picture of premeditation that belied his young age. The trio's method of arrival at the Short residence, alternating rides on a moped, seemed almost childish when contrasted with the horror they would unleash. Javer's communication with Caleb throughout their journey showed calculated manipulation, using his cousin's trust to lure him outside. What began as a plan to steal shoes and gaming equipment escalated into something far more sinister, driven by Javer's festering jealousy of his cousin's lifestyle. In jail, Javer's true nature emerged through conversations with his cellmate. "I've killed 3 people," he would boast. "You don't think I'll kill you too?" His words, reported back to investigators, revealed not remorse but a chilling pride in his actions. "I wish I could do it again," he reportedly said, the words of a young man whose jealousy had corrupted any sense of family loyalty or human compassion. The cold January night concealed 3 figures moving through the shadows of Columbus, Georgia. Their chosen method of transportation, a single moped they took turns riding, seemed almost comically inadequate for the horror they were about to unleash. Javer Tapley, the architect of what was to come, maintained steady communication with his cousin Caleb throughout their approach, each message bringing them closer to their target. The plan had been carefully crafted, though its full scope remained hidden from some of its participants. What Raheem Gibson believed would be a simple burglary, and what Rufus Burks might have thought was just a chance to steal some shoes, was something far more sinister in Javer's mind. The years of perceived slights and jealousy had crystallized into a deadly purpose. When they reached the Short residence, their roles fell into place with practiced precision. Javer, exploiting the trust built through years of family connection, approached the house alone. His phone buzzed with a final message to Caleb, using their cousin bond to lure the unsuspecting teenager outside. The other 2 waited in the shadows, their presence unknown to their target. The moment Caleb stepped outside, the facade of family friendship shattered. Javer's attack was swift and brutal, catching his cousin completely off guard. The grass that would later be found on Caleb's socks told the silent story of his struggle in the backyard. Despite his size and strength, Caleb found himself overwhelmed as Rufus joined in, helping to subdue him while Raheem watched, frozen in claimed reluctance. The binding came next, blue painter's tape and duct tape applied with terrible efficiency. Caleb's desperate questions, Why? You better be playing," went unanswered as they forced him back into his own home through his bedroom window. What followed was 30 minutes of methodical horror. The trio moved through the house with purpose, encountering Gloria and young Gianna, who likely awoke to find familiar faces transformed into monsters. They used household items as weapons, including a 20-pound dumbbell that would later be found bearing the evidence of its grim purpose. The violence escalated beyond their original plan of theft, driven by what investigators would later determine was Javer's deep-seated resentment. Each victim was bound, each subjected to brutal assault, their final moments witnessed by people they had once trusted and loved. When it was over, the killers began collecting their spoils, boxes of Jordan sneakers, Nike shoes, gaming consoles, and other items that seemed trivial compared to the lives they had taken. They loaded their stolen goods into Gloria's Volkswagen Beetle, then took the family's GMC as well, a final insult to the home they had violated. The vehicles, later abandoned at Oakland Park, would become crucial evidence in unraveling their crimes. Justice, when it finally came, arrived with the full weight of Georgia state law. In the hushed courtroom, the evidence painted a picture so horrific that even seasoned legal professionals struggled to maintain their composure. The prosecution laid bare the brutal details. 3 innocent lives extinguished through calculated violence, a family betrayed by one of their own, and a crime scene that spoke of unimaginable cruelty. Javor Tapley, the architect of this tragedy, faced the consequences of his actions first. His guilty plea to 3 counts of malice murder couldn't erase the smirk that occasionally played across his face during proceedings. The judge, noting his utter lack of remorse and the particularly heinous nature of his crimes, handed down the maximum sentence: 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. His incarceration would ensure he'd never again walk free, a fitting punishment for someone who had violated the sacred trust of family in the most horrific way imaginable. Raheem Gibson's cooperation with prosecutors earned him a measure of leniency, though the term leniency seemed almost inappropriate given the gravity of the crimes. His testimony against Rufus Burks, combined with his guilty plea to 3 counts of malice murder, resulted in a 30-year sentence. The prosecution's deal acknowledged his lesser role while ensuring he would still pay a significant price for his part in the murders. The case of Rufus Burks presented unique challenges due to his age. At 15, he was the youngest of the killers, but the brutality of his actions belied his youth. Unlike his co-defendants, Burks chose to stand trial. His defense team attempted to paint him as a peripheral participant who had left before the murders occurred, but the jury saw through this facade. The evidence, including his participation in binding and beating the victims, proved too overwhelming to ignore. Found guilty of felony murder and kidnapping, he received 2 concurrent life sentences plus 15 years. The peculiarities of Georgia law regarding juvenile offenders meant that Burks, despite his heinous crimes, couldn't be sentenced to life without parole. This legal technicality ensures he will be eligible for parole after serving 30 years, a fact that continues to haunt the victim's family. Detective Malone, reflecting on the case, expressed satisfaction that justice had been served, but acknowledged the impossible task of finding punishment appropriate for such unconscionable acts. The ripples of tragedy continue to wash over the Short family long after the court proceedings ended. For Shamika, the loss of her mother Gloria, her brother Caleb, and her daughter Gianna carved a void that no justice system could fill. The betrayal cut especially deep. Javor had been more than just a cousin. He had been welcomed into their lives as family, sharing their vacations, their meals, their trust. "My mother was everybody's mom," Shamika recalled, her voice thick with emotion. She was loved by all. The special bond between Gloria and her granddaughter Gigi had been beautiful to witness, making their joint loss all the more devastating. For Shamika, the weight of being both a grieving daughter and a mother robbed of her child created a unique burden of sorrow. Lindsay Robertson, Shamika's sister, struggles daily with the knowledge of all that was stolen from them. "Caleb and Gigi didn't get to live their lives," she said, her words carrying the weight of unrealized futures. Gigi didn't get to go to middle school, high school, have a dance, or experience her first boyfriend. These normal milestones, forever unreached, haunt the family's thoughts. The trauma manifests in unexpected ways. Lindsay's daughter sometimes pretends that Gigi, Caleb, and Gloria have come to visit. The family plays along with these imaginative scenarios, finding a bittersweet comfort in these moments of make-believe connection. It's their way of keeping the memories alive while processing their immeasurable loss. Perhaps most painful is the knowledge that this wasn't the act of a stranger, but someone they had nurtured and trusted. During summer visits, they had opened their home to Javor, shared their family's intimate moments, and even bought him clothes. Gloria's generosity had extended to him as if he were her own, making his betrayal all the more incomprehensible. The The family's grief has become a complex tapestry of memories, both cherished and painful. They remember Gloria's energetic presence, Caleb's shy smile, and Gigi's infectious laughter. Yet these sweet recollections are now forever intertwined with the horror of their final moments and the betrayal that led to their deaths. It's a burden the surviving family members carry every day, their lives forever marked by an absence that no court verdict could ever fill.